So essentially, it's a new approach to search results. It's Google's attempt at integrating generative AI into their search results to essentially provide users with more content and more context without them having to navigate to additional sites. Which
isn't that a problem?
Yes, to a degree. It's a problem that necessarily doesn't have clear-cut solutions, but is one that I think can be overcome with different strategies to still make use of that feature if and when sort of it actually gets released properly, because as you mentioned, it has been looming for what feels like a significant amount of time now. It's still in the sort of beta testing phase. There's no real word on an official release for it. I think that sort of indicates there's a lot of tweaking going on behind the scenes to make sure it's kind of offering as much value as possible whilst not taking away the efforts of people who sort of use Google as their sort of main platform to generate results, such as us working in SEO. So,
well, exactly. I think it's very similar to the conversation around featured snippets, where the argument is if people are getting the answers that they need from the search results without ever even going to someone's website in the first place, doesn't that sort of almost take away from the importance of your website, where people aren't even visiting in the first place because they get that answer straight from the search engine?
Correct.
But
essentially that is the case.
I could see the argument, and I know the argument for the featured snippet is that if you are seen to be the one that's giving that authoritative take, where you're the one that has the featured snippet, you're getting that brand awareness out there, and people are recognizing you as the thought leader that is the expert in your field, that is essentially leading that conversation, where I have the definitive answer for this, and my business knows best, so you can trust us, and people will sort of recognize your business for that. But when you sort of start to blur those lines of, here is a just generated answer from Google that is taking all of these different ideas from lots of different places. Suddenly it's who's got the right answer here, and where has this come from? And that sort of like is my concern, maybe from an SEO perspective, of just whose answer is this, and how can you prove that you really have the best answer if Google's taking the best answer from lots of different sources? If they again, like, I don't know fully what the final SGE GSE search generative experience SGE what that final sort of output, I've seen like examples of like the beta, what it might look like, but whether it's going to have loads of different sources as part of that output it remains to be seen. But obviously if you're listed as one of the sources, if they are going to be sourcing things, then that's good.
Yeah, and I think that's where the value from an SEO point of view comes in, is, if Google is compiling, answers to questions using SGE, they're going to compile the information from a variety of different sources. So if you are one of those sources, that shows that you have an authority within that space. You have that trust and that sort of recognizable brand presence within that space for them to gather that information or part of that information from your site. So that's where we're kind of reinforcing that authoritativeness and trustworthiness within the content itself. But I think that's also one of the things that perhaps one of the reasons why they're taking their time to sort of make sure they get SGE right. It's becoming a mouthful, isn't it? Because, Google's very much been championing strong authoritative content, championing EAT, very hard, and making sure that they're kind of weaning out AI generated content, and they're really pushing for this sort of environment where, the content that users have access to is relevant, is from a trustworthy source. So then to create sort of a more AI tailored search results that goes against that is kind of not really intuitive of the two things being aligned. So I think that what sort of the end place that SGE needs to get to is the results that they provide are no different to what a user would see as trustworthy if they were manually looking for that content themselves. Because it's one thing for Google to say, you've got to make your content really trustworthy, and you've got to make it, have a lot of authority, and the people behind it need to have sort of presence within the industry, etc. But then for them to chuck out a load of AI results that aren't necessarily following that same kind of process. So
yeah, exactly.
I think that's where how that is being worked out is going to be quite interesting to see, but there's definitely still value within that. And like you say, we've seen how feature snippets can be effective, and there is probably an argument to say that SGE is potentially an enhancement of that, and it's still going to have a positive effect. But there's also on the flip side where we can see potentially a lot of users just not bothering to click on websites when they don't need to.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think as well, though, the way that things sort of like, as you say, it's a natural evolution, right? In the way that things are moving forwards.
Mm-hmm.
If it's featured snippets, I'm sure that they're going to stay. But then also, if it moves to this SGE, then it's also a case of like, how does Google sort of like take that information from your website, and it will be a case of maybe a future step, and the next step is going to be reviewing your website to sort of understand how do you present the information in a way that's going to be easier for Google to like pull it out to present as part of the SGE.
Exactly that, yeah. And at the moment, SGE really is focused more on sort of longer tail searches. And I think initially when it is released sort of to the public full time, I don't see that changing massively. I think it will be more tailored to providing results based on longer term searches, based on searches revolved around questions and things like that. So that does then lead on to the consideration of, as you say, how do we optimize content to fall in line with a piece of content that SGE would pick stuff up from. And I think that's going to dictate how we go about sort of content planning, content strategy going forward. And it will also be very industry specific as well. There will be some industries, e-commerce, for example, where SGE probably won't have as much of an impact because people are searching for products to buy. They're not going to get that information from a search engine. Obviously, there's Google Shopping. I'm aware of that, but it's, for people who are searching for the top 5 hikes in the Lake District, SGE will present all those results, and then you can go, okay, great, I'll go on those hikes. You don't necessarily need to go through to the next stage. Whereas if you're purchasing a product or you're interested in a specific service, then navigating to a website is still going to be what you're looking for. So I think it's going to be very specific across various industries, and that's where the sort of difference in tailoring the content comes in.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, though, and I think it is going to be also just query led as well, that there are certain kinds of queries that are going to be better suited to a web result, and like information from a website, as opposed to just, like you said, your example, the 5 best hikes in the Lake District. Like, for me personally, I'd probably want a bit more information than just a list. Not that was a bad example, but it's more, I guess, that like some people would want that, which is great, and then other people would want, like, give me the map, and I want to see some photos of the route and like all this sort of stuff. Like, but if you're literally just like, just give me a postcode and I'm gonna go, then that's also fine. So like different horses for different courses, etc.
Yes, exactly.
Things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be interesting to see how they develop that over time, and whether they implement a case where SGE is applied to every single query. I can't personally see that being the case, but I think that's going to be interesting to see how, when it does officially launch to sort of the public, how we're able to see, and actually how we're able to monitor sort of the impact of SGE. And that's going to be another factor from a sort of marketing and SEO point of view, is how do we actually monitor our performance, in terms of considering how we're ranking for SGE and how we're contributing to those AI sort of generated results. And I hope that Google provides some kind of source or resource to be able to do that.
Wouldn't you?
You would hope. So I think that's going to be interesting to understand that.
Yeah, definitely.
Different clients.
I think the way that Google tend to work is just they do slowly drip feed this information, but if it's a big and sweeping change, they do signpost this stuff fairly well. But again, it just sometimes this stuff takes time, and they're sort of like figuring things out, and we have to sort of be there for the ride. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So remains to be seen when SGE will release, but it's definitely an interesting time, and something that even now I think we can start considering and sort of almost preempting what potentially we see is going to happen to get a jump on things.
Definitely. That, I think, probably